that's all. This is such an important topic. So we do have some new people here at the table. So I wanted to start by giving everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Well, I'm Katie Wessling. I'm the Audit Committee Chair. Served on the board for 12 years. I'm an attorney by trade, and I look forward to working with all of you. And I know all of our screens are different, but I'm just going to go in the order that I see going from left to right. So Alicia, you're up first.
Perfect. So I'm Alicia Barnum. I'm with Reuben Brown and an audit manager on this engagement. I've been on the engagement quite a few years, from supervising the team and now to helping manage. So I look forward to working with you guys again.
Wonderful. Jeff?
Oh, hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Winter, partner with Reuben Brown and the engagement partner responsible for the audit for St. Louis Public Schools for 2020. Been with the firm almost 40 years and have been involved with St. Louis Public Schools audit since they've been a client of the firm. So it's been quite some time. So again, we're looking forward to another successful engagement with St. Louis Public Schools and working with you guys over the next few months.
Victoria?
Good morning. I'm Victoria Glaspie. I'm the Director of Grants and Compliance, and I am the point person for the single audit.
Ronnie?
My name is Ronnie Martindale. Currently, I'm the interim fiscal control director, and I've been with the district for 5 years, and I worked on the audits as an accountant too for the past 5 years. So I'm familiar with Reuben Brown and looking forward to working with them again.
Well, Dr. Adams, I don't know if you need introduction, but I'll give you a chance to.
Kelvin Adams, Superintendent, thank everybody for volunteering. Some of you are doing it because you want it, some doing it because you have to, but I want to thank all of you for working to try to make sure that we have the kind of audit that I think we all want and the public deserves. So thank you very much, everyone.
Melissa?
My name is Melissa Mccabe. I'm an audit manager with Reuben Brown. I have worked on this engagement really since I moved to St. Louis, so probably 6 years now. And I work primarily on the single audit side, so mostly with Victoria and her team. Look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. Amy, this is your first meeting, so welcome.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Amy Bolge. I am volunteering on this committee at Katie's invitation. I have been a parent in the district since 2004 and continue to be, so happy to be with you in that capacity.
Amy has financial background, so we're glad to have that. So, yeah, so all right. Well, several of you have Kelvin Adams for your name, so I'm going to go to Angie Banks next, and then.
Good morning, Angie Banks. I'm the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer. Sorry for my tardiness. I'm the one that always has technology problems, but I'm looking forward to another good audit this year. Thank you.
All right, and then the woman.
Good morning. I'm Pamela Bell. I am the Executive Assistant to Dr. Adams.
Well, thank you, Pam. Now I know I've met you now. We've talked on email a lot.
Yeah, and she'll be taking the notes and doing the minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We do have two other committee members, and I'm not quite sure where they are. Well, Charles Stewart did say he would be running late, so I know where he is. Adam Lane, who is also a board member. I'm not sure where Adam is, so I'll try to get a hold of him, but I think we can go ahead and start. Jeff, would you like to start with kind of introducing us into where we are with everything right now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Katie. There is one other manager very involved in the audit that was unable to join us today. That's Melinda Weissman. Some of you that have been here a while know her. She had a conflict this morning at the last minute, unfortunately, something with her father, and she sends her regards. And of course, the three of us, Alicia, Melissa, and myself, will handle the presentation with regard to our audit plan. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here this morning. The audit committee was something that has existed for quite some time, but it wasn't always in existence. And I'm very pleased that that was instituted. I think it's very important to have a liaison group between the governing body, the board, management, and the auditors. I think the audit committee has been very successful, and I expect it to continue as we move forward with the new governing body, the elected board, and the representatives on this committee. St. Louis Public Schools is an extremely important client for Reuben Brown. We've been working with you for quite some time through good and bad and everything in between, and it's really been an honor to be working with the institution and how important it is to the St. Louis community. Our purpose today, of course, is to kick off the audit with the governing body, the audit committee, and discuss our preliminary plan in conducting the audit. And more importantly, it's a two-way street. We want to obtain input from the audit committee with regard to items that they want to talk about and bring to our attention. So it's not just our presentation of our audit plan, it's also a way of us obtaining information from you to help us do that, plan our audit. So there will be some exchange later with regard to risks and things that are on your mind that we appreciate you participating in, if there are items that are on your mind that you'd like to discuss. And I guess as we're not sitting here in the foundation room that we have for many, many years, at that long table where you can't see people on the other end, we're here on a Zoom meeting, and that just is inherent in the environment that we're working in today. The audit field has changed quite a bit. As we were discussing before everyone got on, we are doing the majority of our work remotely. I know that St. Louis Public Schools folks, I recognize the offices, and you guys are there. We will not be unless absolutely necessary. And we have found that working remotely with our audit clients has really been very smooth, productive, and successful. The one caveat is that it does require a greater degree of focus and planning and communication. And we will be working with Angie and her group throughout the audit process to make sure that that communication remains strong and timely, and that everybody's on the same page, and that we're able to conduct our procedures with the cooperation and assistance of management. So, you know, this is not the end of the world with regard to auditing. We've been doing it for 5-6 months now. If we have to come into the office, of course we will, but we will minimize that time as much as possible for the safety and health of our employees, as well as the district staff. So I just wanted to bring that up, that we will be working remotely the majority of the time, and we'll be conducting our audit like we always have, where we've committed the time and scheduling and staffing for the weeks that we have. And whether we're in the office or working from our homes or working from our Reuben Brown office, you know, our 100% attention and devotion will be towards this audit. I handed out the planning communication document that we're going to, it's about 10 or 11 pages long, and we'll be focusing on that. If you have that in front of you or at a screen, that's where we're going to be turning our attention to right now. The topics we're going to be discussing today, of course, is the scope of our services and what the eventual deliverables are with regard to the audit process, what the objectives of our audit process is, make sure there's no expectation differences between what an audit is per the audit committee and what an audit is intended to be. So we want to clarify that and discuss the scope of our work and the objectives of our audit process. Of course, a preliminary timeline that I hope we can meet. We will work very hard to do so, and we'll go over that in more detail. The next couple slides deal with the areas of focus and a preliminary risk assessment as to where we see the significant risks are and some items that are going on with the pandemic and staffing at public schools that we want to bring to the audit committee's attention that we need to just address and be upfront with. Then we get into kind of our idea exchange, the committee's role in its oversight, what it's been doing, what kind of meetings it has had, and also bringing to our attention any issues that they feel we should know about, including any fraud that may have existed during the year under audit. And then we'll have our Accounting 101 course, which is just to bring your attention to a few upcoming accounting pronouncements that will affect the district. We won't get into detail. We know you guys aren't, accountant scholars and so forth, but we want to bring your attention to what's going on in the accounting environment, the standard setters that require preparers of financial statements and auditors to deal with, and scopes of work that may change going forward with regard to implementing these new standards that are coming down the pipe. So with that, I'll turn to page 1 of our document, which is the summary scope of services and deliverables, and I'll turn it over to Alicia.
Good morning. So thank you, Jeff, for that. The first thing we'll start off with is pretty much our objectives. So what are we planning on providing you all in response to this audit? So of course, the financial statement audit and CAFR preparation assistance. We are also responsible for the single audit, also known as the compliance audit. And last year, we did note that our major programs that we tested were the special education cluster, Title I grants, career and technical education. We also had a prior year finding relating to suspension and debarment. What that means for this year is that we may perform additional procedures if that testing is not already incorporated, just to make sure that that finding has been remedied, or if it should be repeated in the current year. Our anticipated major programs for this year, so the programs we're planning on testing as of right now, includes the Child Nutrition Cluster, the CARES Act Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Release Fund, as well as a Type B program in order to get coverage, and it's also a part of our major program determination. So once we get the final CFA, we'll be able to determine that third program. We are also responsible for issuing the reports on compliance with state requirements and schedules, as well as the management letter, and of course the required auditor's communication. So if we go to the next slide, the objectives and scope of the financial statement audits, we've already touched on the objective, and that was the previous slide. So our responsibility is to conduct an audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and make sure that it is also in compliance with governmental auditing standards. We also ensure that those charged with governance are aware of any internal control related matters or issues that we come across during our audit. Some limitations is that we're required to set up our audit to obtain reasonable assurance that there are no material misstatements, but not absolute assurance. An audit is not designed to detect any immaterial errors or fraud, and we are not designed to provide assurance about internal controls or to identify any deficiencies in those controls. One thing we do like to bring up is management's responsibility. Even though we are going in and we're auditing their numbers and their policies used, it is still management's responsibility to apply the proper accounting policies and to implement. It's also their responsibility to establish and maintain effective internal controls, as well as implementing controls that are designed to prevent and detect fraud, and to make sure that they're identifying any laws and regulations that are material and relevant to them and making sure those are met, as well as making all financial records available to us that's required to perform our audit. And then informing us of any known or alleged fraud, suspected fraud, or any abuse that has taken place. If we move to the next slide, the engagement timeline, this is a little out of order. So it's starting with our meeting today with you all. And then the next item is the interim fieldwork for the financial statement audit and single audit. that actually has already taken place at the end of June and beginning of July. We're then scheduled to begin field work for the actual single audit testing and financial statement audit the week of September 7th. We're hoping to get an initial draft of the financial statements and compliance report the week of November 18th, and to issue a good final draft for your review the week of December 4th, prior to the year-end audit committee and board meeting, which as of right now we have as to be determined still. And then final issuance of the financial statements and compliance report by Christmas Day, so December 25th. If we move to the next slide, the areas of focus, because we're not able to obtain absolute assurance over the risk of material misstatement, our audit is set up based on a risk assessment procedure. So what we do is we take all of your information and numbers presented in the financial statements, and we break it up between high risk, moderate risk, and low risk. A lot of times this is driven by the complexity of the area, as well as the level of transactions or dollar amount, and even has some effect based on prior year findings and recommendations that we've seen. So under high risk area, we include revenue and receivables, capital assets, and the single audit. That primarily, again, is driven by the complexity of those areas. The next is the moderate risk areas. These include cash, investments, expenditures, payroll and related liabilities, debt, self-insurance, and fund balance and net position. And then our low risk area includes inventories, primarily due to its insignificance over the past few years. So based on, if we move on to the next slide, the preliminary significant risks, like I just mentioned, based on our risk assessment, we do have some preliminary risks that we note within the audit that will require us to perform some additional procedures to make sure that we don't have any issues with these areas. So these risks include management override of internal controls. This is a risk that you're going to see on virtually all financial statement audits. So it's incorporated throughout all of our audit procedures and really does not have anything to do with one specific area. The next two risks relate to revenue and receivables. This is again due to the complexity of the area and specifically some governmental requirements with how it's recorded and how it should be recognized. This is also based on some prior year findings and recommendations that we've had in the past. Our final risk relates to capital asset impairments. Again, this area can be very complex with just identifying a triggering event that would require this analysis and then having to do the analysis. So due to the complexity of the area, we deemed it to be a more significant risk. Some considerations that we're taking into account this year is the coronavirus response that St. Louis Public Schools has put into place, as well as the turnover in fiscal control. So now it is my turn to ask you all, are you aware of any significant items that should be incorporated into our audit plan, or any unusual or complex transactions that you think we should consider further or try to incorporate into our audit plan?
Getting myself unmuted here. So, at the moment, I don't know that I have a lot. I'll let Amy speak as well. Did the turnover go okay between the two boards? Is that an area?
That's not what Alicia is referring to.
Oh.
We're talking about in Angie's fiscal control area.
Okay.
Where we have Ronnie as interim manager or director. And he took the place of Ron Martin, who was the fiscal director for a number of years, who retired at the end of last year's audit. So, and my understanding is Mr. Martindale is anticipating also leaving the district at the beginning of September. So we have some concerns. We can't do our audit without information to audit. And Angie's well aware of this, and I don't want to beat it to death, but when there is turnover at a high level for those that are responsible for preparing and working through and with the auditors. There could be issues, there could be delays. The timeline that we put in place was based on prior years when there was adequate staffing and the information we were getting was timely and accurate for the most part. And so we just have to see how Angie's group is addressing this issue. I said kiddingly, I was hoping Mr. Martindale would stick around through the audit. And that was half truth and half kidding. And so I don't know what the plans are. We have not had a deep discussion with Angie about what's happening here. Victoria just informed us at the beginning of today's meeting that she might be taking on more responsibility with regard to overseeing the audit process, which will be new responsibility for her because she's always been involved with the grant part, but not necessarily the financial statement part. So those are what we're talking about, not the turnover in the board. And then the COVID response really has to do with us working remotely. And what I said at the beginning of the meeting, that it's definitely a team effort, that we need constant communication and a plan, and working with our portal and email and getting information back and forth and getting documents pulled for us, which will be a slightly larger challenge for management of the school with this pandemic. And we just need to work together and be aware that this challenge exists. And we've been very successful since this has been going on, and don't anticipate any differences with regard to the public school audit. But this is a big audit, a lot of pieces. And so those two items that are in red on that page are something that we can't ignore.
Well, I guess Angie, do you have any thoughts to that that turnover that Jeff was just talking about to share at this point, or anything we should be keeping an eye on that you want to mention? Or
Sure. I think everyone is aware that, well, at least internally, of the challenge of fiscal control director and the fact that Ronnie is planning a retirement. We've talked about it a lot internally. We've been interviewing for a replacement, but obviously that's not going to be anything that's likely going to help out for this audit necessarily. So we know it'll be a challenge. However, our two accountants that will remain, Kevin and Armando, are very experienced in supporting the audit. And so they'll be here to step up as well. And we'll just be using our resources to make sure that we get things done as best we can. But sure, a challenge.
okay.
Yeah, to expand on that, Kevin and Armando have been working at the schools for many, many years and have always been kind of in the background. Well, actually, they were more in the foreground in the past. And then when Ron Martin was hired and other fiscal directors, they've taken more of a not a backseat approach, but they have a lot of knowledge with regard to the financial operations and activities of the school. So I think that's very, very important. I think the bottom line here is that when we start our audit after Labor Day, that's not the time for the schools to be closing their books and get ready for us. In theory, that should already be done, and we should be conducting our audit, and those books should be reconciled and closed and schedules prepared. So between now and the beginning to middle of September, I think is the most important part for the school board to get ready for the audit, to reconcile the accounts, to clean things up, so to speak, just like they do every year. So this is, when Mr. Martindale retires, we're hopeful that a good majority of the audit is done. The preparedness for the audit is done and ready for us, and we won't be in a place where a lot of things still need to take place, because that's where the audit gets inefficient and we have to pull off. I think also we're tentatively scheduled to start the 7th. If there is a need for us to start a week later or something like that, we just need to talk about that and make sure. But we always have to be mindful of the end game and the deadlines that we're trying to meet. So I think that if the preparedness is done between now and early middle September, and we have Kevin and Armando to answer questions and get us documents, and Victoria to do the same, I think we'll be in good shape. But I think what's happening now is the most important thing in preparing for the audit.
So Victoria and Angie, then do you think that timeline you'll be ready for the auditors? Is that still?
Victoria, go ahead.
To be honest, I don't know. I'd have to talk to Ronnie to kind of see what schedules have been prepared, and see what's left so that we can, devise a plan of action to make sure that we're meeting the timeline that's set. And so I can't say that I have an answer for you now, but we could have an answer in the next couple of days so that we can get an idea of what schedules have been done, what needs to be done, so that we're not holding up the progress of the audit.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, it's not like we haven't done this before. I believe that Alicia has sent to Ronnie and Victoria what we call our planning letter, which is our list of schedules and documents that we'll require. It's a long list, and not everything is necessarily required on day one. And there's expected dates that are in there or that will be populated. So when Victoria, maybe this is new from the standpoint of your responsibility, but I think it is important that you and Ronnie figure out where you're at, and then with Angie, and then of course, I think we should schedule a meeting for next week sometime, just to kind of go through stuff, answer any questions you have, and just be realistic about the preparedness and when we can start. So when it's convenient for you guys to have a short meeting with us to plan for the audit, I think that would be the next step.
And if there's anything that Ron previously was responsible for that you guys are unsure of, reach out. We can always send you what you guys provided us last year if it helps at all. And we're willing to answer any questions or provide any support that we can to help you guys get through this process too.
And I've
Excellent
been working,
point.
excuse me. I've been working on that, with Matt and Carolyn, since mid-July, the initial interim audit. So we provided them quite a bit of information to get started on that. And we're in the process of working on certain audit schedules that we know are finalized involving real estate property taxes, things we know that's not going to change. Now, things like receivables that we need to accrue, mainly in the grant area. I'll just have to talk to Victoria and see where we are at that point. But we're moving ahead. We're trying to provide information as we go. We're not going to wait till the last minute. So, and what I want to do is upload that information to the client portal for Reuben Brown, so you can at least start looking at the various documents that you need to audit.
Perfect.
Amy,
All right.
you have, oh, sorry. I just wanted to give you a chance in case she had any questions, Amy, or.
Nope, not so far.
All right. Okay.
All right, perfect. So if there's no other significant items or any complex transactions that we need to consider, we can move on to the committee's role in oversight. So this first part, I just want to verify that there have been no changes in these responsibilities. And the first one is that we meet prior to the audit and at the conclusion in order to discuss any audit plan and results. That you all review any weaknesses in internal control and compliance findings and follow up on the actions taken to resolve any auditor recommendations by management. That you review the financial statements and that you still review all internal auditor reports. even though I know there hasn't been any issue this year, but ideally if anybody is hired in his replacement, if you guys would still review them. So are those still taking place?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. And then have there been any changes in roles or responsibilities within the committee?
No changes in role or responsibility, just the addition of Mr. Stewart and Ms. Bolte at this point. So more members, but no changes.
Perfect. And then has there been any allegations, any suspicions, any known instances of fraud during the current year, any issues with any compliance or laws that are required, and any whistleblower reports received?
You know, if we want to answer that, if we're going into executive session, I'm knowing that this meeting is recorded and so forth, I think that might be pertinent. That is something that would be appropriate to discuss it in an executive session. That
Right.
question actually is geared towards management as well as the committee, but it's really geared more towards the committee because we won't have other opportunities to ask that. We're required to inquire about fraud by management and the governing body, i.e. the audit committee. So I think that, I don't know, Katie, what your plans were. I see it as number 5 on the agenda. I'm thinking that might be more appropriate, and then we can ask Angie, Ronnie, Dr. Adams, Victoria at a later time.
Yes, I would prefer to handle that during the executive session portion.
Right. I mean, I know the answer is going to be no, but I think it's important that we address that appropriately. So let's do that. And then Alicia, make sure we follow up with the management members that are here at the meeting during the audit process so we can document that discussion. And Dr. Adams, we may have a private conversation in the fall, maybe over Zoom with you for 20, 30 minutes at your convenience to just have a one-on-one.
Yeah, that's what we have traditionally done, so that's not a problem.
Great.
All right, perfect. With that, I'll pass it over to Melissa to go over any emerging financial standards.
Okay, so next slide, emerging financial reporting issues. We've really summarized everything in the order that the new standards have been issued, but there's really 2 that impact the district and I think require kind of some further consideration by district management. And the first of those is GASB statement number 84, and it relates to fiduciary activities. So what the standard does is establish certain criteria for identifying activities that should be reported as fiduciary activities. And then it also revises and clarifies the types of fiduciary funds and the financial reporting for each. So the main thing to know there is that currently the district has one agency fund, and that agency fund, it reports the district's retirement contributions that are in escrow, and it also has the student activity funds in it. What this GASB really does is it changes some definitions that could, I emphasize the word could because it hasn't kind of been analyzed by the district yet, as far as I know. It could change the treatment of the student activity funds into a governmental fund. So that is why it's really important for us to start considering this now, because that would be a change. So I would say, you know, soon here we should be looking at the guidance and determining, are there any new fiduciary funds? Are there any changes to the current fiduciary funds that turn them into governmental funds? That's really the key here. And from a school district perspective, the most change we're seeing is in that student activity fund treatment. It's effective, I think, for the next fiscal year, so ending 2021. It was scheduled to be this year, but with all the coronavirus insanity, I guess you could say it got delayed till next year. So that's a small blessing there, I guess you could say. The second item on here that I think really will impact the district is GASB statement number 87, and that relates to leases. Currently, if you have what we call operating type leases, they pretty much run through expenses as the costs are incurred. Under this new standard, what we're going to have is a need to recognize a lease liability and then a related intangible right to use leased asset. So I don't want to call it a capital asset because it's really not termed that, but it basically is kind of a related asset to offset a lease liability. This is, I would say, kind of in response to what's happening on the FASB side. They're making changes to their lease standards. So the GASB has kind of made related changes to their lease standard. And it is effective for the district, not ending next year, but the year after. But again, you know, most districts, they do have leases. This is something we have to consider because we don't currently have the leases recorded as a liability and an asset. It's treated completely differently. So what we're recommending to most governments is to really just start the process of kind of inventorying what leases are outstanding right now, so that you can at least kind of have that knowledge of where you need to start, is first identifying what are all your leases before we start analyzing them. The last few pages are new our new governmental accounting standards that we want just the committee to be aware of. The good news is that the rest of them really don't have any impact on St. Louis Public Schools. So while we want, you know, our board members and management to have an idea of what's coming down the pipeline, it really doesn't impact the district. So that's less work for you guys, it's less work for us, and we appreciate that. Are there any questions on the two standards that I just talked about? No.
Yeah, it is something we discussed previously, especially the fiduciary activity one. There's a reason why the Governmental Accounting Standard Board gives such a lead time for these standards, is because it does require an inventory and some analysis and preparation to implement. And these standards are actually implemented as of the beginning of the fiscal year, not the end of the fiscal year. So I think management, with what we discussed before, has enough on their plate. But with regard to preparing for the audit and closing the books for June 30th, 2020, and we're kind of thankful, although the reason why it's delayed is not a good thing, but it is one less thing that the school will have to do. But with regard to leases and fiduciary activities, it's really a question of digging in, doing an inventory of leases that exist, and it's more than just leases. There's a definition of leases that something may be called something else, but it actually is a lease, so it does require some analysis. And then with regard to fiduciary activities, we need to look at various bank accounts and checking accounts for items that and see how they're accounted for, like the student activity funds. But we can always take into account the materiality of these items. If something is $25, of course, we're not going to go through and account for that. So we will be happy to work with the management with regard to the implementation of these, especially the fiduciary activity one. I think we provided a spreadsheet in the past to maybe Ron Martin, but I think it's probably fallen by the wayside. But that after the audit's done, it is something that will need to be addressed, and we'll be happy to help with that. With regard to the rest of our presentation, I just want to highlight the engagement team, as Alicia said, and how we've always said we're available to assist during the preparation for the audit, and of course during the audit. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I also want to discuss the fact that Jeffrey Randall and his firm participates in the audit process, approximately 20% of audit hours and fees. They've been our partner in the audit process for many, many years. They did not join us on the call today, but Randall and Associates will be assisting us, as they have in the past, to meet the goals of the city with regard to that, the DBE and minority involvement. So that will be taking place again for 2020. We have an arrangement with them for their participation in this year's audit, which we're very happy about. So that concludes our report. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them. Otherwise, we are finished.
I don't think I have any questions at this point. If anyone else. Okay. I think we are absorbing the report and don't seem to have any questions at the moment. So,
Very good.
so then let's see. So, um, so then do you all, so I don't know that we can then move on to things such as a review of the end of year financial reports. Or would you like to do that at this point? We sort of had that one, I believe you sent that one summary slide. I'm sorry, I'm shifting back and forth between screens is sort of a hazard of the current times. So is there anything else on Reuben Brown's plate that you, at this point, you want to bring to the committee then?
Well, the year-to-date financial reports would be a management thing for Manji. The internal audit program would be also internal, and I don't know what's happening with that. So those two items are not Reuben Brown's; those are management.
Okay. So does anyone want to report on the Angie? Or are you trying to? I can't tell if you're trying to say something. Okay.
Yes, well, I did forward a couple of reports for the audit committee just to review. Obviously, we're still going through the year-end process, so we don't have any final data. But I did send a 3-page report or a subset of the board presentation from August 11th that kind of provides a early August to date report for last fiscal year, and that's the audit committee preliminary fiscal year 2020 report that I sent. And basically the first page is just a snapshot, a really high summary of the revenues and expenditures that we pulled that are on our books as of early August, and it just has the categories of the major funds, how we typically classify them with the general operating fund, debt service, food service, our federal funds, and our trust funds. So at the top, we have our revenues that are categorized by source. So you can see the total revenues by fund category, and with a total of $350 million of revenues as of August 11th. Then the expenditures are categorized by object category, with the subtotal of expenditures being $359 million. You'll also see the net change in the fund balance, and you can, of course, see some red numbers there for our debt service, food service, a big one for our federal funds. So this is just a preliminary look at where we are as of early August. Of course, with the federal funds having such a large deficit right now, is because we haven't gotten all of our reimbursements in yet. That's not atypical for this time of the year. We certainly anticipate all those revenues coming in. If you move on to the second page, really it's just a graphical depiction of all the numbers that we saw, a little bit easier to read. And that top pie chart just shows our expenditures, and it gives you a view as to where we're really spending our money. And of course, as you would anticipate, the majority of our funds are spent on salaries and employee benefits. And you can see the other categories there. Certainly, I could walk through more of this if anyone is interested. And then I think importantly is the bottom line chart that shows our expenditures in red and how we spend that money from July through June, which is pretty even spend. But then in blue are our revenues and how we receive those during the year. And you can certainly see the big uptick in December and January, where we receive the majority of our property taxes. And then the final slide is just really just kind of a summary. Well, it's actually the adopted budget for the current fiscal year 21 year, and just in those same categories, what was approved by the board for revenues and expenditures. So if anyone has any questions on that, we can certainly go into more detail.
I don't think I have any questions at this point. Amy?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Let me just take a second here and double check. Cheryl, are you still there? Can you hear me? Cheryl? I'll text just to make sure that we don't have any other members sitting in the waiting room that were that aren't being let into the meeting real quick. Let me just double check with her.
You know, Charles.
I do have a question. Can I ask Angie, in terms of revenues, do you expect any, irregularities or hiccups with funding due to our current unprecedented issues with the virus and all of that in terms of, whether it be state, local, or federal funding?
And I assume you're talking about for the fiscal year 21 year. And that answer will be, we hope not, but certainly possibly. We know that we've already had some state budget cuts that will impact our general operating revenues, at least to the tune of about $4 million is what we anticipate. And of course, with the high unemployment and home foreclosures and things like that, we're not exactly sure how that's going to impact our property and tax revenue. So we'll certainly be taking a close look at that as those revenues start to roll in.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Ms. Benoit is on now, Ms. Westwood.
thank you. I asked her to check in the waiting room just to see if we had any members waiting in there. No one who's popped up, so we'll see. Perhaps they can watch the recording later then. So, all right. So getting back to our agenda. Angie, or Victoria, did you have anything else to say at this point before we move on? All right. Well, if no one else has anything to bring up now, the next, we're ready to then move into executive session unless anyone else has anything they need to bring up at this point. So I'll make that motion to move into executive session. Amy, you're the only other member of the committee on that
motion.
Okay. So we will go ahead then and move into executive session. Cheryl, if you're here, can you help us technologically with that then?
Ms. Benoit? Who is in executive session so she'll know who to cut off? And then in the executive session is not recorded, so
Correct. I think it would just be Amy and Katie.
Right, that's what I thought as well.
And the auditors.
Yeah.
And then of course you stop the recording.
Yeah, I'm gonna reach out to Cheryl right now to make